The one clue that solved this case was hidden in plain sight for over 50 years. This little girl vanished while playing in the snow, and the real reason the suspect got away will shock you. You have to stick around until the end to hear the deathbed confession that finally broke the coldest case in American history. Snow had begun to drift softly across the quiet neighborhood streets, settling over rooftops and coating the bare branches in a pale shimmer that winter evening. The kind of night where most families stayed inside, where warmth gathered behind curtains, and where children were called in early from play. Yet Sycamore, Illinois in 1957 did not feel gloomy. It felt familiar, safe, wrapped in the assumption that neighbors watched neighbors, that children could run between yards, and that innocence remained untouched beneath the street lamps. Maria Elizabeth Redolph lived in that comfort, the smallest child in her family, adored and sheltered, always eager to play even after darkness had begun to fold over the town. Her laughter tended to break silence the way a bell cuts through still air. She was young enough to trust the world and to believe that anyone who smiled at her might be a friend. It was early December when the snow began, and the season had not yet settled into its deeper freeze. Maria begged her mother to let her go outside after dinner. She wanted to play in the falling flakes, to watch them touch her mittens and her hair, to be part of a moment that only children understand with such absolute joy. Her best friend, 8-year-old Catherine, lived nearby, a constant presence in her play and in her imagination. The two were nearly inseparable. When Maria ran outside, it took only moments before Catherine joined her. They played a simple game, darting back and forth along the street, dodging the approaching lights of cars and giggling as their small figures were illuminated, and then swallowed again by the dark. The air was cold enough to redden their cheeks, but not enough to send them running inside. It was a normal suburban night, an ordinary moment in an ordinary town, one that held no warning of what was about to change. At some point during their play, a man approached the children. He was older than they were used to talking to, but not so old as to seem unfamiliar, tall, with a youthful face and a voice that held a casual gentleness that could appear harmless. He said his name was Johnny. He asked if they liked dolls. He asked if they liked piggyback rides. In the memory of childhood, details blur, become impressionistic, and yet the shape of moments remain. Catherine would remember his sweater, his light hair, the friendliness that seemed unthreatening. This was not a world where stranger danger warnings were spoken, not in the same way, not with the urgency that later eras would adopt. So Maria laughed, said yes, and the man lifted her onto his back, spiraling her through the cold air as if she were dancing with the snowfall. Childhood trust is powerful, unburdened by caution. The moment Catherine ran home to grab her mittens just for a minute, only a moment, became the moment that split one life from another. She returned expecting to see Maria still there, still laughing, still riding the shoulders of the stranger whose name she had only just learned. But when she came back, there was only the quiet street and falling snow and the empty space where her friend had stood. She searched, first with confusion, then with growing fear. She went to the Ridolph home. The family assumed Maria was hiding, playing, teasing her friend. Her older brother went out to look, then neighbors joined, then police, then half the town. The search began with hope and quickly shifted into something more frantic. What happened between that moment of disappearance and the discovery that would follow months later is a story that would haunt generations. It would not end that night, it would not end that winter. It would stretch through decades of investigation, suspicion, silence, accusation, and doubt. The name of the man, Johnny, floated like smoke over the case, half remembered, half believed, and yet haunting. The cold settled across the streets of Sycamore that night like a veil. Something had been taken from the town. Something had broken. Maria's parents, Michael and Francis, were ordinary people whose lives were reshaped in an instant. Their home had always been warm, loving, full of chatter and Sunday routines and supper tables. Maria was the youngest, adored not only by her parents but by her siblings. She was seen as bright, soft-hearted, afraid of the dark, yet fearless in the ways children often are when trust shields them. Her family pleaded publicly for her return, appearing on television and radio, their grief displayed before strangers who could only imagine the depth of their loss. The town joined the search. Thousands looked. No one found her. Winter passed. The snow melted. The season shifted. Then spring warmed the ground. And on an April day, 5 months after Maria vanished, the quiet answer came in the woods, far from Sycamore. Her remains were found near a fallen tree in a wooded area miles away. Only clothing on her upper body remained. The rest had been taken by weather, by time, by whatever happened before she died. The body was identified by dental records and a lock of hair that matched the girl who had once danced in the snow. The cause of death could not be determined then, not in a way that gave closure, not in a way that answered the endless, aching question. How did she end? Grief changes people. It changes communities. Sycamore became a place marked by memory, by a wound that had no immediate explanation. Investigators began searching for answers, questioning everyone who could have been nearby, who matched the description, who might have had any connection to the children. And among those questioned was a local young man named John Tessier, who would later go by another name, Jack McCullough. He was interviewed early in the investigation, and his family gave an account of his whereabouts that seemed to absolve him. He said he had been away in Rockford, arranging enlistment-related matters, and telephone records at the time appeared to support his timeline. He took a lie detector test. He passed. The case moved on. The story of his involvement became a quiet possibility that drifted into the background. As years passed and the case remained unsolved, the world changed. New families moved into Sycamore. Children grew up hearing the story whispered in community memory as a kind of tragic legend tied to the streets where they walked. The Riddle family carried the loss as a shadow across every holiday, every anniversary, every quiet moment when absence was louder than sound. Catherine grew older too, carrying the memory of that evening, the stranger, the snow, the moment she returned to an empty street. Trauma freezes some moments in a clarity that nothing can erase. Time has a strange way of reshaping truth. Decades after the case had gone cold, another story began to surface. In the 1,990 seconds, a quiet revelation arose within the Tessier family itself. A statement made during the final days of a mother's life. Words released like a confession, spoken with pain and regret. Those words suggested that the young man who had once been eliminated as a suspect may not have been innocent after all. The case, once sealed by the weight of years, cracked open. Memory and testimony began to be reevaluated. A family member, driven by those words and by her own history of pain within that family, continued to press authorities to reopen the case. It would take many years before her persistence was answered. But when investigators looked again, when they re-examined the old timelines, they found that the events of that night could be interpreted differently. The times of the phone call, the distance between cities, the statements from officers' details, once accepted as firm, began to shift. What had seemed impossible became plausible. And so the investigation centered once again on the man who had once been called Johnny by a little girl in the snow. When the case was reopened in the early 21st century, it stirred enormous public attention. A man who had built a life under another name, who had served in the military, who had aged into his 70s, was suddenly confronted by the ghosts of his youth. He was questioned. At first, he answered calmly, then grew evasive, then angry. The past had returned, not in whispers, but in a knock at the door and the weight of accusation. The trial that followed was marked by emotion, memory, and testimony shaped by time. Witnesses spoke of what they remembered. Old acquaintances recalled details of his behavior. Former inmates claimed he had spoken of the unaliving of a child. The prosecution painted the image of a young man whose desire had led him to take something he could not control. The defense argued that the case was built on memory stretched across half a century, on inconsistencies, on the need for closure that outweighed the demand for certainty. But the verdict that came was one of guilt, a conviction, a life sentence. The town felt that after so many years, after so much unanswered grief, justice had finally spoken. But time is never finished. The story did not end there. Years later, another examination took place, this time led by a new prosecutor who reviewed the evidence without the emotional weight that had driven earlier proceedings. In that quiet, deliberate review, something startling emerged. The timeline that had once been thought impossible, the very timeline suggesting that the accused could not have been present at the moment of the abduction, was supported by phone records, by distance, by physical reality. The conviction, once seen as closure, suddenly became a question again. And so the verdict was overturned. The man once convicted was declared innocent by the court. Yet innocence in law does not erase memory. It does not erase grief. It does not erase the moment of disappearance in the snow. It does not restore the lost child, The lost time, the lost sense of safety. The town was now left with a new question. If not him, then who? The crime remained unsolved. The child remained gone. The story remained open. What does it mean to seek justice in a case so old that those who lived it have grown gray? What does it mean to pursue truth when memory is shaped by pain, by hope, by longing for closure? There are moments in history that are not resolved neatly. They linger, they echo, they become part of the identity of a place, of the families who carry them, of the communities shaped by them. Sycamore became such a place. Decades later, residents still speak her name quietly. The story remains part of Sycamore's identity, carved into the landscape of memory. New generations hear the details and feel the haunting weight of what happened. Some see the case as a reminder of caution. Others see it as a reflection of how time can distort justice. And some simply see it as an unhealed wound. The snow that fell the night Maria disappeared seemed innocent then. Now, in the retelling, it becomes a symbol. A blanket that covered the world as something terrible unfolded. A soft veil that could not hide what happened. Snow often symbolizes purity, childhood, wonder. But on that night, it also became part of something heartbreaking. In the end, Maria's story remains open. That final twist with the phone records changes everything we thought we knew about this case. Tell me if you believe the right man was convicted. Let me know who you think really took Maria that night. Share your theory in the comments below. I read every single one. For more true crime stories with unbelievable endings, make sure to follow the channel.